Welcome, fans of Christopher Manson's Maze. This is Bill M. back again with another Maze commentary. This is number 18, and in this one, I just wanted to talk in general about some better ways we might be able to find clues. So, as I'm sure you regular listeners of my Maze commentaries already know, as always, I'm on a quest to try to better understand the clues of Christopher Manson's Maze, so trying to avoid the rabbit hole kind of answers that just seem to fit things after the fact. Those kind of rationalization answers. Trying to distinguish those from things that are probably more plausible to be clues. And I have learned some things myself in the process of creating these videos. And back in commentary number 5, I talked a little bit about, well, what's a clue and trying to bring things from the ground up. So we're going to take a little bit of a look back at that one, and I'm going to propose some better questions we can ask ourselves when we are looking. So I'm focusing on determining intended clues for correct doors, as opposed to parts of the riddle and other mysteries of the book, like who is the guide and what happened here and all that stuff. So, for this clip, let's think about correct doors, because most of the time that's really what it's going to be about. And as always, please give me a like if you like these commentaries. All right, let's get going. As I said, I tried back in commentary number 5 to go back to the very beginning, try going right to the book, to the directions, try to build things from the ground up. What do we really know about clues? Let's try running through some of those things from the directions. First of all, we were told into the directions of the book Maze, there are any number of clues in the drawings and in the story to help you choose the right door in each room. Okay, so there could be more than one clue for picking the right door in a given room. We're told 2 clues in a series of rooms may relate to one another and may indicate a path. And as I have said before, I notice a lot of Maze fans, particularly in Into the Abyss and Maze Cast for that matter, seem to not really consider this possibility. And that's because they're more focused on the third one, which is other clues may refer to a specific door in a single room. And as I said in that past commentary, I mentioned in a side note, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that the clues for a door in that given room are in that room. Maybe the clues are somewhere else in the book. In fact, this brings us to 4. We're told anything in this book might be a clue. I talked a little bit about that in the commentary. And finally, we were also told not all clues are necessarily trustworthy. And as I said, no, this doesn't mean that there's no way of distinguishing a misleading clue from a real clue, and therefore we should give up. No. I do believe there are some ways of trying to distinguish plausible clues from highly improbable clues. Like I said, I expanded on all these things in commentary number 5, and I recently did a series of commentaries on the riddle of the maze, and I think one thing we can all learn from that is clues are really easy to encode, in the idea that it's simple enough to come up with some reason for it and then hide it, but really difficult to decode. Now, presumably the author put codes in so that they were hard enough to find, but in the end he still wants you to find them and, see the genius of how he put these things in. I don't think he's a sadist who just, put these impossible things in and doesn't really have any clues, doesn't want you to solve them. Again, from going over the things in the riddle, I don't really believe that's the case. So when it comes to clues for which door to pick in a given room, I propose maybe ask this question. How would an author like Manson encode a clue to take this particular door? Let me explain more of what I mean by that. So let's take it back even further and think, what would be a way to specify a correct door in a room? Think about all the different ways you can specify a door. Well, one thing, you can specify a door by its exit number. So, for example, if you're in a room and the correct door to take is the door to room 37, then there should be some way to encode the clue 37, the number 37 somewhere. Another way, number 2 here, is referring to the exit's relative position in the room or on the path. So, for example, maybe that door 37, it might be the door all the way to the left. So you might want to refer to that as the first exit. You could refer to that as the left door. West, if the word west is in there, that kind of implies things on the left. Or it could be something relative in another way, like as we've seen in some cases, go back, some indication in the room saying we need to take the door that we entered from. And another one, as we've seen a number of times, you can specify a door by process of elimination. So in other words, you specify something about all the other doors in the room except the special door. And another thing that might happen, number 4, there might not be an indication of a correct door at all, or maybe there's an indication that there is no correct door. And what I'm talking about here specifically is with the trap rooms. As I did mention in my commentary on trap rooms, in a lot of trap rooms, there seems to be an indication that you are in a trap, in which case there is not a correct door, but there is some clue in there saying that there are no correct doors because you're trapped. And finally, you could specify a door by some trait of the door or object relative to the door, and I'll talk more about that. But let's expand on each one of these things I just said. So again, we're in some room. There is some correct door to take. That door, of course, has some specific exit number. And let's say we wanted to put in a clue. Let's say we're writing the book. We want to put in a clue somewhere that specifies that door by exit number. How could we do that? Well, we could mention the numbers in the text in some way. You know, like look at this picture here. If we wanted to indicate 41, maybe somewhere in the text we have the words 4 and the word 1. For example, we write a line in the dialogue that says, 4 people noticed it was 1 o'clock, 4 and 1. Or it could be arithmetic of some kind. You know, we count 10 of some object and 4 of another type. Their sum is 14. Or 7 of one type and 2 of another. The product is 14. Or maybe that 7 and 2 could mean the number 27. Or we could count letters or words in a sentence and come up with a certain number. Another possibility is Roman numerals. Say there's a room and there's a picture of a whiskey barrel that has XXX on it. Well, maybe that's an indication of 30. Maybe we could specify a number by encoding the numeral shapes. So some objects that look like a specific number together. Let's say there's a drumstick and then a snare drum next to it. And if you look at it from this angle, well, it looks like a number 10, like a 1 and a 0 with the stick on the drum. We could indicate an exit number by encoding that number in an anagram or a pun. For example, the word there, THERE, that's an anagram for 3. 8, ATE, could be the number 8 as a homonym, you know. Another kind of pun, tree sounds like 3. Maybe a picture of a tree could indicate 3 in some way. Or something a little more existential, symbolic, like if we saw a picture of a swinging golfer, that kind of brings to mind a golfer yelling 4. So FORE, we could take that as a FOUR. Other associations, maybe it's a cultural one. So, for example, if we see a broken mirror, well, we think of 7 years bad luck, so maybe a broken mirror might be a way to convey the number 7. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that if you were in a room in Maze and you see a tree, for example, that it necessarily is a clue for the number 3. My point is that if you were writing and drawing a book like Maze and you wanted to hint at the number 3 in some kind of hidden way, that would be one simple way you could do it. You could have a picture of a tree implying 3, just as you might do it with drawing the room in the shape of a triangle, or writing the dialogue as 3 paragraphs of text, or there's a picture of a calendar that's open to the month of March, third month. So, which leads me to believe that an author like Christopher Manson is much more likely to use an approach like that rather than, say, draw 35 leaves across 2 trees, and have one of the sentences be 7 words long, and expect the reader to think of dividing the 35 leaves by the 7 words to get 5, and subtracting the 2 threes to get 3. Hopefully you get my point. Let's continue on with the other examples. Another way you could indicate a specific door is by relative position. You could make your clue that way. The first door, the second door, third door, so on. The same ways to encode an exit number could apply to this instead. If the number 1 is somewhere in there, that could mean the first door, the one all the way to the left. Likewise, you could see the word left in the text. Maybe that might be a hint. Take a left door. Or left, we're thinking anagrams here. Felt is an anagram for left. And if you actually do look through the book Maze, there are a couple of cases where felt shows up in the dialogue, and the leftmost door is actually the correct one. And I don't know if that's complete coincidence. Or likewise, last door, you could say, well, and at last we did this. Maybe that's in the dialogue. That could be a way to indicate last. Or by letter, this is kind of sequence thing. A, B, C, D, left from right. C might imply a third door. Say if we see a lot of C words in there. Other directions too, west, starboard, like I said, that could indicate going to the left. Or like I said, other indicators like turn back, turn around might mean, take the door that leads back to the room you just came from. Some other ways I said we might be able to indicate a door process of elimination. So we refer to all the doors but that one. So there are some rooms, for example, where arrows might be pointing to 3 out of the 4 available doors. And that's a way to indicate the 4th door that doesn't have anything special with it. We saw a variation of this in room number 1. I talked about that. So you have story, fable, tale, yarn. And fable ends up being the one that's not specified in the text anyway. And as I said, there could be no correct door. In trap rooms, there may be no clues for a specific door and simultaneously clues to indicate there's no escape. In this picture here, this was another example of elimination. So this is kind of like a bad omen, as we see with the frog and the fly. So that's kind of an indication, don't take that door. That's another process of elimination thing. And finally, one other way we might be able to specify a certain door in a given room is look for some trait of the door itself or an object relative to that door. So, for example, you may see an arrow or an object pointing to the door. That's a way to indicate that door. Though, as I've said in some previous commentaries, that's usually more often than not used in a way to eliminate that door. Very rarely does it seem arrows point to a correct door in Maze. Maybe the door's exit sign might be written differently. That might be some way to indicate that door. The exit might be a different type of physical door. Maybe all the other doors are open and this one's closed. Or, it's made of a different material. And a room an exit might be specified by a good omen near it. So we saw that back in Room 36 is a comedy mask musician and a tragedy mask musician. You go to the comedy one. There may be references in the text to an object near the door. So just a hypothetical example here. Let's say in the dialogue, somebody says, well, I gave her a sly look as she said this. And if we look in the picture of the room, there's a fox next to a door. So we might think, okay, sly, that kind of indicates the fox. Maybe this is a reference to that door. There may be a referenced item relative to that door. So in room 19, there are 2 exits and there are 2 main objects in the room. There's a statue and there's the artist. And my hypothesis is that the statue refers to the exit that's further away in the room, the artist, the one that's closer to us. And finally, as I said before, it's possible there might be an item in a different room. Let's say this room has a bicycle in it. Well, this second room has a bicycle in it too, and there's an arrow pointing to the left in that room. So maybe in the first room with the bicycle, we take the left door. So I bring that up because we do see a number of objects in Maze that kind of repeat. Not bicycles, of course, but we do see umbrellas and top hats, things like that. So, in closing, let me just reiterate my point of all this is to try to get yourself to think, okay, if I wanted to specify a clue to this door, how might I do that? Because I think all too often, and I've fallen for this myself, we kind of think in terms of, okay, well, I know the correct door is, let's say, 18. I kind of know that from trial and error. So, what can I play around with here to get the number 18? Or what are these objects that are pointing to the door 18, and how can I get some kind of indication of that? No, what I'm trying to suggest here is to think instead, okay, if I was going to write the book and I wanted to specify 18, or the second door, or the door that has this object next to it, or the door that's higher in elevation than the others. How might I do that? And I think if you think more along those lines, you might be able to find more probable clues. So, some other final questions to ask yourself to finish this up. Does my answer sound like something the author could have come up with? I referenced an article in a previous episode when I was talking about the riddle. This great article from Mazecast that was kind of titled, Is It Possible That the Author of Maze kind of came up with my crazy solution? And the example it gives in room 8, you're supposed to pick door number 12, and one of the proposed explanations for that is, well, there's a bowling pin in the room, and there's this theme kind of with bowling, with crashing and echoing. So yeah, I kind of think of bowling, and 12 would be the number of strikes you have to bowl to get a perfect game. And as this article was pointing out, it's like, well, that is still kind of a stretch, because even if we assume bowling is there, of all the ways to try to indicate 12, why would the author pick bowling and then assume that the reader would relate it to perfect strikes and not some other number? I mean, it's already kind of ambiguous as to whether or not the room indicates a theme of bowling. But even if you did an explicit theme of bowling, like you made the room an actual bowling alley and you drew bowlers in a bowling league, are you sure that the author would expect the reader to get the number 12 from that? Of all the different sort of ways you could encode the word 12? Now, another question that's good to ask yourself is, okay, I came up with this reasoning to pick this door. Can I use that same reasoning to justify picking a wrong door? Because if that's the case, maybe my reasoning's not valid. So a great example of this is when people use these long mathematical justifications to pick a door. If you played around with some of the same math, could you maybe get one of the other exit numbers? In that case, maybe your reasoning is not really a clue. Likewise, we'll see sometimes the dialogue refers to X and there's an X-like thing in front of the correct door. Okay, well, look again in the dialogue. Maybe there's a reference to another object that's near one of the wrong doors. Once again, maybe that doesn't have anything to do with it. There is, of course, always the chance that we're finding something and the author didn't consider, oh, maybe somebody might misinterpret it that way. But anyway, just to finish up here, another question to ask yourself is, can I find more than one potential clue for the same door? So that may lend it some credibility if you find more of those things. Because if you wanted to indicate a specific door, you probably would want to put more than one clue in there, wouldn't you? So anyway, that is the end of this little commentary. I just wanted to throw out some ideas here to get you thinking, okay, how might I be able to find clues? And trying to think that in terms of, okay, if I was writing a book like this, what would I do to maybe indicate this number or this door or that? And think of some of the suggestions I have. Will this help with our own exploration of the other rooms I haven't covered? I don't know. Hopefully so. We'll see. Thank you for listening, and take care.